Welcome to my YouTube channel, Heartbreak Chronicles, a place where you will hear a large number of fascinating and intriguing chronicles about hearts that are completely broken by female betrayal. Let's not drag on for long. Let's get straight to the point. From the outside, Claire and Michael Whitmore seem to have it all. A house straight out of an architectural magazine with white shutters, a sprawling front yard, and a bright red door that seemed to welcome you into a fairy tale. Michael worked in finance, the kind of job that paid well but consumed most of his waking hours. Claire had once worked in event planning, but when Michael's career soared, they agreed she'd stay home to focus on the family. Only there was no family. Not the kind she had dreamed of anyway. Children had been part of the plan once. But after 3 failed pregnancies and years of growing resentment between them, Claire had quietly buried that dream along with many others. Their home remained silent, save for the hum of the dishwasher and the faint music that played from Claire's phone as she cooked meals that Michael was often too late to eat. To everyone else, they were the perfect couple. Michael was the reliable, hardworking husband. Claire, the supportive wife who always knew how to host a flawless dinner party. They were invited to all the right social events, sat at the best tables at fundraisers, and smiled for photos that made their life look idyllic. But behind closed doors, Claire felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Michael wasn't cruel or abusive, just distant. He was a creature of habit, predictable to a fault. Every weekday morning, he left the house at precisely 7:15 a.m. with a kiss on her cheek that felt more like a chore than a gesture of love. Evenings were spent in separate rooms, him buried in financial reports while she lost herself in wine and old movies. Conversations grew stale, and any spark that once existed had long since fizzled out. Claire was only 34, but some days she felt ancient, forgotten. And then she met him. It was on a business trip with Michael to New York City, a rare occasion where he asked her to accompany him. For once, she wasn't just the wife left at home. The city buzzed with energy, and Claire felt a strange sense of freedom as they checked into the luxurious hotel regalia. While Michael rushed off to meetings, she wandered the streets of Manhattan, breathing in the life and chaos that seemed to pulse through the city. That evening, she found herself in the hotel's dimly lit bar. It was sophisticated and quiet, the kind of place where powerful men conducted deals over expensive scotch. Claire ordered a glass of red wine and let herself relax for the first time in what felt like years. "Mind if I join you?" The voice was warm and confident, with just a hint of mischief. She looked up to see a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that fit him like a second skin. His dark hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. His eyes, gray and piercing, held her gaze for a beat too long. Claire hesitated. "I'm waiting for my husband." "Lucky man," the stranger said, flashing a charming smile. "I'll keep you company until he arrives." They talked for what felt like minutes but stretched into hours. His name was Jonathan Ryder, a venture capitalist who seemed to have the world at his feet. He was charming in a way that Michael never was, witty, attentive, and completely uninterested in his phone. He asked her about herself, her dreams, her regrets. For the first time in years, Claire felt seen. The wine flowed, and so did the conversation. When Jonathan leaned in, his voice a low murmur in her ear, it sent a shiver down her spine. "I know a way to make life a little more exciting for you," he said. "No strings attached. Just fun. Something different. Something more." Claire's heart raced. She knew she should walk away, but the thought of returning to her colorless existence made her stomach turn. One drink became 2, then 3. When Jonathan's hand brushed against hers, she didn't pull away. That night, Claire crossed a line she had never thought she'd cross. Jonathan wasn't like other men. He wasn't just a fleeting escape. He was a temptation wrapped in luxury. He introduced her to a world of high-end fashion, private clubs, and penthouse suites. He gave her expensive gifts and envelopes filled with cash, telling her it was just a little help to enjoy life more. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement," Jonathan said with a sly grin. "I get your company, and you get to live the life you deserve." Claire rationalized it. It wasn't love. It wasn't cheating, not really, it was survival. a business transaction. And it was temporary, just until she had enough to buy her own house and start over. She opened a secret bank account, carefully depositing Jonathan's cash without raising suspicion. She told herself it was a safety net, nothing more. First, she was careful, meticulous. Every move was planned to perfection. She met Jonathan in places where she knew no one would recognize her. She changed her phone password, deleted text messages, and avoided taking any risks. But the longer it went on, the more comfortable she became. Jonathan made her feel alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. He whispered promises of adventure, showed her glimpses of a life that was thrilling and unpredictable. For the first time in her adult life, Claire felt free. Little did she know that her perfect plan was already starting to unravel. Claire was no longer the woman she once knew. Gone were the days of quiet dinners alone and mundane errands in the suburbs. In their place, a new life emerged. A life filled with secrets, luxury, and danger. She became a master of deception. Her phone was always on silent, her conversations carefully measured. She kept her two worlds separate, creating an elaborate web of lies that even she began to believe. Every Thursday afternoon, Claire would go to yoga or visit her friend Melissa. In reality, she met Jonathan at upscale hotels under different names: Anna, Emily, Rachel, never Claire. Their encounters were intense, wrapped in silk sheets and candlelit promises. And afterward, Jonathan would leave her with a kiss and another envelope filled with crisp $100 bills. At first, the money felt like a lifeline, a way out of her stagnant life. She hid the envelopes in a locked box under the floorboards in her closet. The first time she opened a secret bank account, her hands were trembling. She walked into the bank, rehearsing a story about inheritance money. By the time she walked out, the account was open, and she felt a heady rush of power. It became a game. How much could she save before Michael noticed? How much would it take to finally be free? The answer, Claire decided, was at least $500,000. Her new life came with new rules, new routines. She shopped in different neighborhoods, wore expensive sunglasses to hide her face, and paid in cash whenever possible. She knew how to avoid suspicion, at least she thought she did. But every double life has its cracks. The first crack appeared at a dinner party. Michael had invited several colleagues over for drinks and hors d'oeuvres, a casual evening to celebrate a recent promotion. Claire had spent the day preparing the perfect spread: charcuterie boards, artisan bread, and her signature lemon tart. She played the role of the perfect hostess, laughing at jokes, pouring wine, and smiling through her boredom. But as she leaned over to refill a glass, a voice froze her in place. "Well, if it isn't Claire," said a man with a knowing smirk. Claire turned, her blood turning cold. Standing before her was Eric, one of Jonathan's business partners, a man she had met just weeks earlier at a hotel bar in New York. "Eric," she said, forcing a smile, "I didn't know you were a friend of Michael's." "Small world," Eric replied, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Very small." Claire's mind raced. Had Eric said anything to Michael? Did he know the full extent of her relationship with Jonathan? She spent the rest of the evening on edge, hyper-aware of Eric's every move. But by the end of the night, he left without a word, and Claire breathed a sigh of relief. Still, it was a stark reminder of how precarious her situation had become. The cracks widened further when Michael began asking questions. "You've been going out a lot lately," he said one evening as they sat on opposite ends of the couch. "Yoga, lunches, shopping. I barely see you these days." Claire smiled, feigning nonchalance. "Just trying to keep busy. You know how it is." But Michael's eyes lingered on her a second too long before he nodded and returned to his newspaper. Claire knew she had to be more careful. Her secret life continued, but she tightened her routines, avoided risks. Jonathan was understanding, patient even. He promised her that everything would work out, that their arrangement could last as long as she wanted it to. "Just stick to the plan," he said one afternoon as they lay in bed, the city skyline stretching beyond the window. "You'll be free before you know it." Claire clung to those words like a lifeline. Weeks turned into months. The secret bank account grew steadily, inching closer to her goal. The thought of freedom, of walking away from Michael, starting fresh, felt almost within reach. But with every step closer to her escape, the lies grew heavier. One night, Michael came home early, unexpectedly. Claire was in the bedroom, hurriedly stuffing an envelope of cash into her hidden box when she heard the front door slam. Claire! Her heart leaped into her throat. She slammed the floorboard shut and smoothed her dress before stepping into the hallway. "You're home early," she said, forcing a smile. Michael stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, a strange look in his eyes. "Meeting got cancelled," he said. His eyes flicked past her, scanning the room. "What were you doing?" "Just putting away some laundry," she said quickly. Michael nodded, but the tension lingered in the air. For the first time in their marriage, Claire felt truly afraid. Michael had always been a practical man, rational and even-tempered. But there was something in his eyes that night, a flicker of suspicion, that sent a chill down her spine. Claire knew she was running out of time. She had to be more careful, more convincing. One mistake, one slip-up, and everything could come crashing down. But she wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. The money wasn't enough. The plan wasn't complete. She told herself she just needed a little more time, a few more months at most. Then she'd be free. Little did she know, time was the one thing she no longer had. It started with a small, nagging feeling, something so faint that Michael barely noticed it at first. Claire had always been independent, but lately, her behavior seemed different. Subtly at first, she smiled more, laughed at things that didn't seem funny, and wore perfume even when she was just going to yoga. Michael chalked it up to her trying to find happiness in her own way. Maybe she had taken up a new hobby or made new friends. He wanted to believe that. He truly did. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with him, growing stronger with each passing day. He started noticing other things, small inconsistencies that didn't add up. Claire had always been meticulous with their household budget. But now, money seemed to be slipping through the cracks. Unexplained charges on her credit card, expensive new clothes she claimed were on sale, and little trips that she never mentioned until after they'd happened. Then there was her phone. Claire had always left it lying around the house, on the kitchen counter, in the living room, on the nightstand. But now it was always with her, even when she went to the bathroom. One night, as they lay in bed, Michael glanced over and saw her texting. When he asked who it was, she quickly locked the screen and smiled. "Melissa," she said casually. "She's planning a weekend trip, and I promised to help." Michael nodded, but his gut twisted. He knew Melissa. They weren't that close. It was nothing, he told himself. He was being paranoid. But the feeling refused to leave. The next day, while Claire was out, Michael made a decision that changed everything. He called a private investigator. The investigator's name was Tom Grayson, a wiry man in his early 50s with sharp eyes and a calm, unflappable demeanor. He listened quietly as Michael explained his concerns, never interrupting, never judging. "Mr. Whitmore," Tom said once Michael had finished, "if your instincts are telling you something's wrong, they probably are. We'll get to the bottom of it." Michael nodded, his throat tight. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find. Maybe proof that Claire was telling the truth. Or maybe, he pushed the thought aside. The waiting was the hardest part. Tom had promised updates every few days, but the hours felt like years. Michael found himself watching Claire more closely, studying her every move. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. He noticed how often she checked her phone, the way her smile seemed forced when she returned from her yoga sessions. He started timing her absences, noting how long she was gone and how often her story didn't quite line up. Then, one evening, Tom called. "I think you'll want to see this," Tom said, his voice neutral but with an edge that made Michael's skin crawl. "Meet me at my office tomorrow." The next day, Michael sat across from Tom in a dimly lit office that smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Tom slid a folder across the desk. Michael hesitated, his pulse pounding in his ears. Slowly, he opened the folder. Photographs stared back at him. Claire, dressed to the nines, walking into a luxury hotel. Another shot of her at a cafe, laughing with a man Michael didn't recognize. More pictures of them together, holding hands, their faces close, their bodies too familiar. Michael's vision blurred. His hands clenched the edges of the folder until his knuckles turned white. "His name is Jonathan Ryder," Tom said, his voice calm but steady. "We've been following them for a week. They meet at least twice a week, sometimes more. It's not just an affair. It's something deeper. There's money involved. A lot of it." Michael looked up, his eyes burning with a mix of rage and betrayal. "Money?" he repeated. Tom nodded. "We found records of a separate bank account in her name. Large deposits, all in cash. She's been planning this for a while." Michael felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Claire had been lying to him for years, stealing from him, living a secret life right under his nose. And now he knew the truth. That night, Michael sat in the living room, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth. Claire was upstairs, humming softly to herself as she prepared for bed. He imagined confronting her, shouting, demanding answers. But no, this required something more. Something careful, calculated. Michael had always been a patient man. He understood timing, precision, and the power of a well-laid plan. He wasn't going to confront her now. Not yet. He would wait, watch, plan. And when the time was right, he would make sure Claire regretted every lie, every betrayal, every dollar she had taken from him. Michael's lips curled into a cold smile as the firelight flickered in his eyes. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Michael spent the next week carefully constructing his plan. Every detail was considered, every step meticulously prepared. He knew Claire's routines, her weaknesses, her secrets. Now all he had to do was guide her into the perfect trap. The trick, he decided, was to act normal. If Claire suspected anything, even for a moment, she would bolt, and he couldn't risk that. Not when they were so close to the end. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Michael casually mentioned the idea. "Claire, I've been thinking," he said, slicing into his steak. "We haven't spent much time together lately. Why don't we get away for the weekend? Just the two of us. Some fresh air. A change of scenery." Claire blinked, surprised. "A weekend away?" "Yeah. There's that cabin upstate we used to rent," Michael said, smiling warmly. "It'll be good for us. No phones, no distractions. Just us." Claire hesitated, her fork hovering in midair. She studied Michael's face, searching for signs of suspicion. But his expression was calm, relaxed. For the first time in months, he seemed happy. "I think that sounds nice," she said finally. "Great. I'll make the arrangements," Michael said, raising his glass. Inside, his heart raced. The cabin sat on a secluded stretch of land, miles from the nearest neighbor. It was rustic but cozy, with a stone fireplace, worn wooden floors, and large windows that looked out onto a dense forest. The perfect place for a quiet weekend, or something much darker. Michael played the role of the attentive husband flawlessly. He packed their bags, prepared snacks for the road, and even bought Claire her favorite wine. As they drove upstate, he chatted casually about work and plans for the summer, weaving a tapestry of normalcy around them. But beneath the surface, his mind was cold and focused. The moment they arrived at the cabin, Michael's game began. He suggested a walk through the woods, holding Claire's hand as they strolled along the narrow trails. He pointed out birds, joked about their old hiking adventures, and laughed at her stories. Claire started to relax. Maybe this weekend really was what they needed. Maybe Michael didn't suspect a thing. That night, they sat by the fire, sipping wine as the flames crackled. The air was thick with warmth and nostalgia. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Michael asked, his voice soft. Claire smiled. "Of course. We got lost on that trail for hours. You were so mad because we missed the sunset." Michael chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I've always hated surprises." His eyes flicked to hers, and for a split second his smile faded. Claire felt a strange chill run down her spine, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "You know," Michael said, swirling his wine, "I've been thinking a lot about trust lately, how important it is in a relationship." Claire tensed. "Yes, it is." Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And honesty, that's the foundation, right? Without it, everything falls apart." Claire's heart began to race. She forced herself to stay calm, to smile, to act like nothing was wrong. "I completely agree," she said. "Why do you bring it up?" Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found something interesting the other day," he said, handing it to her. Claire took it, her fingers trembling slightly. She unfolded the paper and felt the blood drain from her face. It was a photo, a grainy surveillance shot of her and Jonathan walking into the hotel regalia. Her breath caught in her throat. "I thought it might be a coincidence," Michael said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "But then I found more." He slid a second photo across the table. This one showed her and Jonathan in a cafe, leaning close, their hands entwined. Claire stared at the images, her mind racing. How had he found out? How long had he known? "Michael, I can explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael raised a hand, silencing her. "No need," he said. "I've already heard enough lies." Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Michael stood, pacing slowly around the room. "You know, Claire, I've always been a patient man. I've overlooked a lot over the years. But this is something else entirely." His voice was calm, too calm. It sent a wave of panic crashing over her. "I trusted you," he continued. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? Selling yourself for cash? Planning your little escape?" Claire's breath came in short gasps. "Michael, please, I wasn't going to leave you." Don't," Michael snapped, his calm facade cracking for the first time. "Don't lie to me again." He stopped pacing, standing directly in front of her. His eyes bored into hers, cold and unrelenting. "Do you know what betrayal feels like, Claire?" he asked softly. "It's not just anger. It's a slow, burning poison. And now, I think it's your turn to taste it." Michael smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. He turned and walked toward the front door, locking it with a heavy click. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. "Michael, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He simply turned back to her, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "This weekend, Claire," he said, his voice like ice. "We're going to play a little game, and by the time it's over, you'll understand exactly how it feels to lose everything." Claire's breath caught in her throat as the door clicked shut. The sound seemed louder than it should have, echoing in the quiet cabin. Her heart raced, her mind spiraling into panic. Michael leaned against the door, his face calm and unreadable. "Michael," she said, forcing a nervous smile. "This isn't funny. Let's just talk. Okay? We can figure this out." Michael chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Talk? Oh, we're far past talking, Claire." He moved slowly across the room, his footsteps deliberate, measured. Claire instinctively backed away until she felt the rough wood of the wall behind her. "This weekend is all about honesty," Michael said. "You've been keeping so many secrets, but now it's my turn to be honest with you. No lies, no pretending." Claire swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" Michael paused, tilting his head thoughtfully. "I want you to feel what I've felt for the past few months. Trapped, helpless, betrayed. I want you to understand what it's like to lose control of everything you thought was certain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her phone, holding it up. You won't be needing this. He powered it off and tossed it into the fireplace. The screen cracked as it hit the stones, and the heat from the flames began to lick at its edges. Claire's stomach twisted into knots. Michael, please. You're scaring me. You should be scared, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because this isn't a game you can win. The hours that followed blurred into a nightmare. Michael kept her in the cabin, cutting off any chance of escape. He wasn't violent, at least not physically. His weapon of choice was control, a psychological warfare designed to dismantle her piece by piece. He started with her secrets. Let's play a game, he said, settling into the armchair across from her. It's called confessions. You tell me something true, and if I believe you, I'll let you have a glass of water. If I think you're lying, well, you'll have to wait a little longer. Claire's throat was dry, her pulse hammering in her ears. I never loved Jonathan, she said quickly. It wasn't about him. It was about the money. I was just trying to find a way out. Michael studied her for a long moment. Then, with a smile, he poured her a glass of water and set it on the table in front of her, just out of reach. Good start, he said. But we're just getting warmed up. The second day was worse. Michael began stripping away the comfort of the cabin piece by piece. First, he locked the refrigerator. Then, he disconnected the Wi-Fi and hid the keys to the car. He turned off the heat, forcing her to shiver in the cold while he sat by the fire. I've been thinking, he mused, swirling a glass of whiskey. You always wanted to start over, right? Well, now you can. No husband, no fancy clothes, no secret bank account. Just you and your survival skills. Claire's eyes darted to the door, but Michael noticed. He grinned. Go ahead, try to run. It's 20 miles to the nearest town through dense forest. I'll even give you a head start. For a moment, Claire considered it. But the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just a game to him. He would chase her, and he would find her. That night, Claire sat on the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Michael watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable. Why didn't you just leave? He asked quietly. Why all the lies, the deceit? Why not just tell me you were unhappy? Claire's lips quivered. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want it to be messy. Michael's face darkened. Messy? You didn't want it to be messy. So you lied to me for years, slept with another man for money, and built an entire life behind my back. His voice rose, sharp and cold. Do you even hear yourself? Claire curled into herself, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Michael crouched in front of her, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. Sorry won't save you, Claire. Not this time. The final twist came on the third day. Michael disappeared for several hours, leaving Claire alone in the cabin. She searched frantically for a way out, but the windows were sealed, the doors locked tight. When he returned, he carried a box. He placed it on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were the envelopes of cash she had hidden in their bedroom, the savings she had carefully accumulated for her escape. Recognize these? He asked, holding up a stack of bills. Claire's stomach dropped. This is what it was all about, wasn't it? Not freedom, not love, just money. He tossed the cash into the fireplace. Flames roared as the bills curled and blackened. No! Claire lunged toward the fire, but Michael grabbed her, his grip ironclad. You wanted a fresh start, he whispered in her ear. Now you'll get one. But not the way you planned. Claire sobbed, watching her dreams turn to ash. Her strength was gone, her will to fight drained. Please, she begged. Let me go. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Michael smiled, a slow, chilling smile. Oh, I'll let you go, Claire. But not yet. Not until you understand what it feels like to lose everything. Claire sat in the corner of the cabin, her body trembling, her mind trapped in a loop of fear and regret. Michael stood near the fireplace, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. The smell of burnt cash still hung in the air, a cruel reminder of everything she had lost in the last 3 days. The once cozy cabin now felt like a prison, its walls pressing in on her. She had tried begging, reasoning, even crying, but none of it had worked. Michael's calm, measured demeanor never wavered. He was in complete control, and that terrified her more than anything else. You look tired, Michael said, his voice soft and deceptively gentle. You should rest. We have one more day together before it's all over. All over, Claire whispered. What do you mean? Michael smiled. A slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. You'll see. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every gust of wind against the windows sent her heart racing. She knew Michael was planning something final, something she couldn't come back from. Her mind worked frantically, searching for a way out. She couldn't just sit here and wait for him to decide her fate. She had to act. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning for anything she could use. A weapon, a tool, a chance to escape. Then she saw it. The iron poker leaning against the fireplace. Michael was in the kitchen, humming softly to himself as he prepared a pot of tea. It was now or never. Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, Claire moved quickly and quietly. Her fingers closed around the cold metal of the poker, and she turned toward the kitchen. Michael looked up just as she swung. The poker struck his shoulder with a sickening thud, sending him staggering back. Claire didn't wait for him to recover. She ran toward the front door, fumbling with the lock, her hands trembling violently. Behind her, she heard Michael groan. You shouldn't have done that, Claire, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The lock finally gave way, and Claire burst out into the cold night. The forest loomed ahead of her, dark and endless, but she didn't hesitate. She ran, branches clawing at her skin, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Michael followed her, his footsteps steady and unrelenting. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew these woods well, knew they formed a labyrinth that could trap anyone unfamiliar with their twists and turns. Claire stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully. She cried out, falling to her knees. The forest seemed to close in around her, its shadows swallowing the faint moonlight. Claire, Michael called, his voice echoing through the trees. You can't run forever. You don't know where you're going. But I do. Claire forced herself up, ignoring the pain, and kept moving. She didn't know how far she had run or how long she had been running. The only thing that mattered was getting away. She burst into a clearing and froze. In front of her stood an old, abandoned hunting shack. It was small and weathered, its windows broken, but it was shelter. Claire limped inside, slamming the door shut behind her. She pressed her back against it, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the dark space. There was a rusted toolbox in the corner. She grabbed a hammer and clutched it tightly, her knuckles white. Footsteps approached the shack, slow and deliberate. Smart move, Michael said from outside. But how long do you think you can hide in there? Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She had no plan, no way out. She could hear Michael circling the shack, tapping on the walls, his footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. "You're only making this harder on yourself," he said. "Just come out and we'll talk. We can still fix this." Claire closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She knew Michael too well. He wasn't here to talk. Then she heard it. A sudden silence. The footsteps stopped. Claire tightened her grip on the hammer. Her eyes locked on the door. She knew he was close, waiting for her to make a move. Minutes passed. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, the door burst open. Michael stood in the doorway, his eyes wild, his clothes streaked with dirt. Claire screamed and swung the hammer, but he caught her wrist with terrifying strength. "You've been lying to me for years," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "Now it's time for the truth." Claire struggled, but Michael was too strong. He forced her back against the wall, his grip tightening. "I trusted you," he hissed. "I loved you, and you threw it all away." Claire's vision blurred with tears. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Just let me go." Michael paused, his grip loosening just slightly. For a fleeting moment, Claire thought he might show mercy. But then his expression hardened again. "No, Claire. This is the end of the road." The sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. A voice called out, "Hey, is someone there?" A beam of light cut through the darkness. Two hikers stood at the edge of the clearing, their flashlights sweeping across the scene. Michael froze, his eyes locking with Claire's. For the first time, she saw something other than rage in his expression. Panic. Claire seized the moment. She wrenched herself free, stumbling toward the hikers. "Help me," she cried. "Please. He's trying to kill me." The hikers rushed to her side, their eyes wide with shock. One of them pulled out a phone and called the police. Michael didn't move. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. But he knew it was over. The sound of sirens cut through the night. As the police led Michael away, Claire sat on the ground, her body trembling. She watched him disappear into the back of the patrol car, his eyes never leaving hers. Even in that moment, she knew this wasn't truly over. Michael's words echoed in her mind. "You'll understand what it feels like to lose everything." And she did, because even though she had survived, the life she once knew was gone forever. Thank you very much for listening to this story to the end. I hope you liked. We work for you, looking for and telling you the most effective stories about women's betrayal, shocking intrigue, interweaving the plot and unexpected reactions of angry men. Save us, put likes, write comments, and, of course, subscribe to the channel to not miss any story.